right. I wanted to go into the origin of birth certificates today. And I think this is a good time to kind of get into it. This is going to be a long read, so I don't know if I'm going to get through it today. But under King Henry the Eighth of England and his Venetian Magi advisor, the poor laws were promulgated around 1535, coinciding with the first official mandate requiring uniform record keeping by all Church of English parish of births, deaths, and marriages. The poor were considered to be the responsibility of the church, including ensuring they had ample work and did not starve to death, as they were considered by default property of the church. Under Queen Elizabeth I of England, a set of measures which were introduced, which had the effect of accelerating the disenfranchisement of land peasants into land paupers. Under the Erection of Cottages Act 1588, peasants required local parish permission to erect dwellings, whereas before the erection of dwellings by land peasants on their lord's land was considered a right. As a result, the ranks of the landless poor or paupers swelled. Under Queen Elizabeth I of England, the laws concerning the administration of the care of the poor were refined through the Poor Law 1601, which introduced a basic set of rights for the poor, as well as the introduction of 2 overseers of the poor, guardian in each parish, elected at Easter and funded through the first tax levy through local rates, now called council taxes, on property owning rate payers. Now you wonder why when you own a property, you have property tax. You're just a tenant. Under Charles II of England, the concept of settlements as plantations of working poor controlled by the Church of England was further refined through the Settlement Act 1662 and the Poor Act 1662, including for the first time the insurance of settlement certificates equivalent to birth certificates, passports, and Social Security rolled in one document. A child's birthplace was its place of settlement, unless its mother had a settlement certificate from some other parish stating that the unborn child was included on the certificate. However, from age of 7 upwards, the child could have been apprenticed and gained a settlement for itself through called indentured service or voluntary slavery. Also, the child could have obtained a settlement for itself by service by the time it was 16. If you remember, I did a video telling you that the so-called black people taken from Africa, it was a fucking myth. It was fake. It was the Europeans. They were the slaves. But this myth was promulgated to make so-called indentured, so-called autochthonous or aboriginal people to believe that they are from a foreign land, so the so-called Europeans could come over and steal their land. This is not racist. I'm just telling you the truth. Under the Reforms of Settlement Act 1662 and Poor Relief Act of 1662, no one was allowed to move from town to town without the appropriate settlement certificate. Now, I'm telling you because if you see what's coming on now, the Real ID Act. If a person entered a parish in which he or she did not have official settlement and seemed likely to be chargeable to the new parish, then an examination would be made by the justices or parish overseers. From this examination and on oath, the justices would determine if that person had the means to sustain himself. The results of the examination were documented in an examination paper As a result of the examination, the intruder would then either be allowed to stay or would be removed by means of what was known as a removal order, the origin of the modern equivalent of an eviction and a removal notice when a sheriff removes people from their home. According to the various settlement acts from the 17th century onwards until the introduction of birth certificates, the issue of a settlement certificate was considered a privilege, not a right. If a peasant wanted to move, the home parish could choose to issue a settlement certificate, which then effectively became an indemnity insurance to the new parish if the pauper was unable to earn a living. A settlement certificate was only valid if it bore the seals of the overseers of both parishes and that of the local justices, and was not transferable. This is the same model of modern passports for citizens listed as paupers, peons, used today. Damn. Due to the increase in the number of the poor in 1723, a new law was passed called the Workhouse Test Act in 1723, in which those who wished to claim benefits and relief as poor now had to enter the workhouse, being essentially a prison for men. These are the FEMA concentration camps that people talk about, which I could get to that, but I'm not going to get on that. Women and children to perform some set work to ensure that all poor were accounted and could be identified. New laws also introduced to force the paupers to wear a P on their right shoulder. Would that kind of constitute as the mark of the beast? Shoulder as a mark of their status. This is both the origin of the P still placed as a mark on modern passports and other official documents, and the P worn by prisoners in 20th century. Beginning in 1773 with the Enclosure Act 1773, followed by the Enclosure Consolidation Act in 1801, English Parliament effectively privatized massive amounts of common land for the benefit of the few, causing huge numbers of land peasants to become landless paupers. Well, this is what happened in 2008 with the mortgage crisis. And therefore, in need of a parish assistance, the Enclosure Acts are the foundation of land title as it is known today. Because of the deliberate legal theft of land under Parliament enclosure laws of the late 1800s and the early 19th century, the number of paupers dramatically increased. This led to the most awful and cruel laws being introduced to deliver to an elite few. The slave labor force needed for the Industrial Revolution through the Poor Law Amendment Act in 1834, which effectively stated that the poor could not receive any benefit unless they were consistently employed in a workhouse prison. Thus, despite the international treaties against slavery, they very worse slavery being wage slavery. Wait, let me read that again. I'm sorry, I messed up. Thus, despite international treaties against slavery, the very worst slavery being wage slavery or lawful slavery was born, whereby men, women, and children lived in terrible conditions and were worked to death. Beginning in 1834, a number of historic changes were introduced to the record keeping of births, deaths, marriages, the insurance of documents, and the management of the poor. In 1834, British Parliament introduced the Poor Laws Amendment Act 1834, which recognized Church of England parishes into unions, which would then be responsible for the poor in their area and administrating by a board of the poor guardians, also known as the Board of the Guardians. The clerk of the magistrates' courts were still held power of a clerk of the Board of the Guardians. And in 1835, the Municipal Corporation Act was introduced, which effectively standardized the corporate model for towns, boroughs, including making the municipality with elected officials responsible for the data collection and service administration. And in 1836, the Birth and Death Registration Act 1836 was introduced, which for the first time created the General Register Office and the requirement for uniform records of births, deaths, marriages across the empire by municipal councils and union parishes. Thus, on July 1st, 1837, the birth certificate was formed as a successor of the settlement certificate for all paupers disenfranchised of their land, birthright to be considered lawful voluntarily slaves, with the benefits provided by the local parish/region underwritten by the Society of Lords as it is today, which is the Lloyds of London, meaning the City of London. Beginning from 1871, further historic changes in the administration of vital statistics, such as birth certificates and death certificates, which the introduction of health districts, sanitary districts. See, this is where they get the coronavirus. This is why they had the coronavirus. Remember, the introduction of health districts and sanitary districts, and I read the Constitution to you. It gives the government almost plenary power in a case of a medical emergency. The Local Government Act of 1871, Public Health Act of 1872, and Public Health Act of 1875 create a system of districts called the sanitary districts, governed by a sanitary authority responsible for various public health matters, including mental health, legally known as sanity. Two types of sanitary districts were created, being urban and rural, while the sanitary districts were abolished in 1894 with the Local Government Act of 1894. The administration of the poor is still maintained in part under the concept of district health boards of guardians, including the magistrate and other justices of peace. Since the 1990s, under the United Nations and the World Health Organization, WHO, by the Convention of the Rights of the Child, the system of issuing birth certificates as proof a man and woman being a permanent member of the underclass became an international system. So now do you understand? The World Health Organization is tied in all of this shit. Oh, man, I'm just going to stop here. I'm going to read the rest of this probably tomorrow. I'm out.